Okay, so I wanted to dive a little bit deeper on one of the hot topic discussions that Pantheon Rise of the Fallen had a few weeks ago on their social media. It was around August 29th, and the initial question was, how important are the dialogue options to you when you engage with NPCs around the game's world? Now for me, I kind of took it at face value, like maybe they're talking about extra dialogue options that can give you more deep dives into the lore, which does sound nice. I do like the idea of that too, but realistically, dialogue options can be so much more than just that. I mean, in this genre, massively multiplayer online has always been the first part of the name, but in the vast majority, so has RPG. And from an RPG perspective, just think about some of the most critically acclaimed RPGs you've ever played, or anyone's ever played. What is it that the vast majority of the best ones seem to have in common? In my opinion, I think it'd be the fact that the experience is dynamic. For example, let's take some of the popular ones. The Witcher series, the Dragon Age series, Pillars of Eternity, Divinity, Knights of the Old Republic, a few titles out of the Gothic series, Fable, Elder Scrolls, Fallout, Mass Effect, you know where I'm going with this. In the majority of these games, if not all of them, you could play through the campaign in one way and have a different experience a second time based on the choices you make. And a big part of how these choices are made is through the dialogue. You might decide to spare an entire village of people that practice blood magic, or decide to use more nefarious forms of persuasion instead of trying to work for it. A lot of times, this is the baseline for what can make a game in this genre really good. And I feel like for MMORPGs, it shouldn't be different. What if you did a questline one day that wanted you to do some jobs for villagers around a settlement, and let's say you only needed to do 3 jobs to get the quest stage completed. So let's say you decide to do 8 of them, or 10 maybe, and maybe they're just simple ones like fetch some water for the baker, make some weapons and armor for the militia, round up all the missing scouts and hunters to have them come back to prepare for an upcoming bandit attack, stuff like that. And you learn that at the end of that quest, you have to actually help the village defend against this bandit attack, and how many jobs you did or what choices you made have an effect on the different aspects of the attack. Maybe if you didn't round up the scouts and hunters, you don't get to lay down a bunch of traps in preparation for the attack, or scout out all possible flanking directions and they catch some of the settlement by surprise. Maybe they're not properly equipped for the fight because you neglected to properly outfit them, so you have 5 or 6 dead on your hands. Or maybe every single person survives the attack because you did prepare, you made sure that everybody would be ready and that there would be no surprises. And then those people that survived, maybe later on in the game this opens up new quest lines, potentially new stories for them to tell, or new dialogue options. Even if all we get is a thanks and bonus questline reward, knowing that what we did actually made an impact is how some of these special experiences with RPGs get created. And keep in mind, there's much better examples across all the games we listed, but that was just to give you the general idea. Now normally I would expect people to say, coding this kind of thing in an RPG is normal, if not a lot easier to do than an MMORPG. There's so many nuts and bolts that go into making one that it would be a lot harder without spending a crazy amount of more time on it. And I'd say I'd understand that if it wasn't already done in MMOs before. On August 11th, there was another hot topic discussion that talked about what were the most memorable quest lines we've done, and what kind would we like to see in Pantheon. The 2 biggest examples I gave were related to the dialogue options, but games that have already done things like this would be ESO and Star Wars: The Old Republic. Sometimes during the quest lines of these games, you might be able to make choices that can impact the result of a quest line or the journey you take. And it's this freedom that I believe is one of the components for making an MMO that can be ranked among the best. It's not always about the graphics or even the animations for that matter. For some people, it's about giving us the choice to define our experience the way we want to. Now, of course, you gotta have some filler. It'd be incredibly difficult to branch off every individual questline into their own multi-stage adventure, but as long as there's still that dynamic feeling to some or the vast majority, I think it'll serve them really well. A good point that somebody did mention is that it would be worth being careful with incorporating all that choice through dialogue, because players might just decide to go with the quickest and most effective route to get the quest done and move on to the next, which would render the developers' efforts almost completely wasted. And to be honest, I think that's already a lot of developers' mindsets when it comes to developing modern MMOs, and part of the reason I think why people say that MMOs don't feel like RPGs anymore, why they feel so streamlined or linear. But there will always be people that are willing to take the road less traveled by, even if they know full well what each story path will give them. Some players might not even want to research that kind of thing. They'd rather just find out for themselves. Luckily, I do believe Pantheon is planning a way to counteract data mining, although it might prove difficult to actually make. I'll have to research further on that, but another thing about Pantheon is that with the progression system it'll have, you'll be fully capable of finding gear that's best in slot even at lower levels. So I can't think of a more perfect system to have dynamic dialogue options than with a system like this. Maybe in one of these quest lines we start getting whispers in our head from a dark source, and we can choose to either follow it or ignore it. but maybe if we follow it, we end up with the best weapon for our class even at endgame. I'm very curious to know what everybody's thoughts on this are, so please post them below. Of course, I always advocate for different kinds of progression methods like dynamic events and such, but when it comes to the questing, do you think we should have a degree of choice that impacts the quest itself alongside giving us extra story? Or should they just keep it simple and save the more dynamic experience for other content? Leave it all in the comments below, and have a good one, folks.